Britt Merrick is my guest, and he has written a book called Big God, What Happens When We Trust Him. It's published by Regal Books, and it has real depth when you especially look at it through the lens of his life experience. I don't often say that of authors because often, what they write is theoretical, or it's heavily researched, which is good, or it's about something other than themselves. Of course, this is about the Lord, but it's the lens through which Britt sees faith that intrigues me. Welcome to the program, Britt.
Thank you. Happy to be on.
Oh, it's awesome to have you. You are the founding pastor of not only a church called Reality, but a network of churches, which includes churches in other parts of California and even one in London, England. Why London?
Well, the short story is the Lord led us there.
Well, that's enough for me. But,
but London has gone from being a churched place to being a very unchurched place, from a Christian culture to a post-Christian culture. And so we're really looking at places, mostly urban areas, that need to be re-reached with the gospel, that have become de-churched or unchurched. And so we're thankful that the Lord is leading us to those areas, and London is on the forefront of that.
Would you refer to these other churches as satellites?
No, they're autonomous churches, and we're a family of churches.
And are you the senior pastor overseeing them all, or does each church have its own senior pastor?
Each church has its own senior pastor, but then I'm sort of a mentor to those pastors.
Right. It's interesting, a lot of young church planters are doing very similar to what you're doing. I'm connected with a number of younger pastors in Africa, and some of them from the major urban areas are planting churches in other countries, as well as within their own city. And I have a very strong relationship with one pastor in Joburg who has a church in London. He has a church in Europe, and he's just planting a church in North Carolina.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And with the internet and streaming and all this kind of stuff, I mean, it's like the world becomes your parish.
Yes.
Which is really cool.
That's beautiful.
Now, this book, Big God, why did you write it, first of all? Before we get into the deep personal story behind it, why did you write the book?
Well, it's about faith, and faith is really the issue, right? Faith is, that's how we get saved, by grace through faith, right? The righteous are called to walk by faith and not by sight. Romans, Galatians, and Hebrews says that. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. So that's really the key issue. And so I went to Hebrews chapter 11, which is really the key passage, the Hall of Faith, play words on the Hall of Fame there, and really wanted to discover how these men and women who were too ordinary, too much like you and me. I mean, if we looked at the whole of their lives, they could be in something called the Hall of Shame, if there was such a thing. They just didn't have perfect lives. They have missteps and failures and sin. I mean, think about David and his sin.
Yeah, or Rahab.
Rahab, right? Lying prostitute.
Yeah, or even Abraham, how dumb was he to take his wife's advice and sleep with Hagar?
That's one you never do. That's the one time where you say, wife, no.
Yeah, you say, as you say in the book, no.
Yes.
No. But he didn't say no. Mind you, it was maybe cultural practice in those days. But yeah, you're right. And these, Hebrews 11 is such a terrific chapter. And as I was reading your book, and these I love the fact that you stayed biblically focused, which makes a lot of sense when you talk about faith. But you're writing this book, and you talk about testing, benefits of passing a test. Testing is not tempting. Man, did you face a test?
Yes.
Maybe you're still going through it, I don't know, but tell me about what happened.
Well, just as the book was getting ready to go to print, just a few months back, my wife and I were getting ready to go on a surf date. That's what we do on Monday mornings. I'm a pastor, Monday's a day off, and we go surfing together. Just walking out the door, and my daughter's school called. Her name is Daisy Love. And they said, your daughter's fallen down and she's not doing well, and she said to take her to the hospital, which for Daisy Love, if you know her, is strange. She's a tough little girl, beats up on her 9-year-old brother all the time. So we knew something was wrong. Rushed out there. Sure enough, she was having trouble staying conscious. She was vomiting. We took her to the emergency room, and they thought that when she had fallen down, she had ruptured a kidney or something, some internal organ, because they saw some mass in her abdomen that they thought was a gathering of blood. Began to do more tests. Pretty soon it got intense in the emergency room. They rushed us out. More doctors rushed in. They came out a little while later and said, Mr. and Mrs. Merrick, that mass that we thought was an accumulation of blood isn't blood at all. It's actually a tumor. And it's the size of a Nerf football. If you can imagine that in a 5-year-old girl, I mean, it went down from inside her pelvis area up into her diaphragm, was pushing on her lungs, took up more than 50% of her abdominal cavity. And it turns out that it was a rare form of kidney cancer known as a Wilms tumor. There's only 500 cases in America per year. And it was the largest they had seen of that sort. And what had happened was when she fell down that day, it ruptured and it was now spilling cancerous cells into her body. And so when we started out the day to go surfing, we ended up the day with the doctor looking at us saying, your 5-year-old daughter has stage 3 cancer.
That's just about as devastating as it gets. What did you do?
Well, I'm so thankful to the sovereignty of the Lord. He had me writing this book, and he had my wife and I journeying through these great testimonies of faith that testify to how big God is and how present he is in difficult and overwhelming circumstances. And because we had lived our life committed to the Lord and Scripture and reading the Bible, I got to tell you, by grace, as soon as we heard that news, all the promises of God, the character of God, the love of God came flooding into our hearts. And we just had this amazing experience of Christ, just a supernatural experience of Christ and his immediate presence. And it wasn't the thing where we were counting on God to heal our daughter. We do have a theology that says God can heal cancer. I've seen him do it. But that wasn't the thing. It was no matter what happens, we believe God to be good. We believe him to be present. We believe that he's caring. The night before my daughter went into surgery, I was faced with the real possibility that she might die the next day. I mean, it was a dangerous surgery. The tumor was congenital, meaning she had it since birth, so it had grown around organs and all that. They basically had to cut her in half to get it out. She's got a scar from the back of her rib cage to the other side of her belly button. And that night I had what I'll call the dark night of the soul, where I really, truly wrestled with God and the fact that my daughter might die the next morning. And you know the thought process that you go through with something like that. I'm a pastor. I'd given my life to teaching and preaching about Jesus and pointing people toward Jesus. And now the next morning, my daughter might die. And I had to wrestle with the Lord. And I got to tell you, by grace, he brought me to the place where I could truly say that, Jesus, you are of more value than even my children. And if my daughter dies tomorrow, nothing changes between me and you. I still believe that you are God and that you are good. I will still preach you and teach you and point people to you. If my daughter dies, nothing changes. Jesus, you are of surpassing value.
Though he slay me, yet will I trust it.
There it is.
Job said.
There it is.
What about your wife?
Same thing. It's been a parallel journey. I mean, the two shall become one. So we've gone through it together. And just the other day, we were talking about it. And you know, all that our daughter has suffered and we've suffered with her. And as a parent, you know that when your child suffers, it's worse than you suffering.